Okay. Welcome everyone to the European School of Theosophy, which was founded in 1981 by Geoffrey Farthing and other theosophists. Before beginning today, let us take a moment for inner reflection. From the unreal, lead me to the real. From the darkness, lead me to the light. From death, lead me to immortality. Thank you. My name is Juliet Bates, and I'm part of the team of the school. The school offers lectures and online courses on a variety of topics, as well as organising seminars and conferences. This year, the EUST is commemorating its 40th anniversary in the mysterious and mystic land of Egypt, and you are all very welcome to join us at 2 conferences being held in Egypt. And we would like to thank the Blavatsky Trust for their support. From the 16th to the 21st of October, we will be in Luxor, where we have our conference entitled The Veil of Isis, with optional tours also including Cairo. Whereas the International Theosophical History Conference will be held in Alexandria from the 13th to the 14th of October. Furthermore, look out for the London conferences being planned for June 2024 in London. You can register to receive our newsletter to keep updated on all of our programs and not miss anything. The EUST is a not-for-profit organisation, and the large majority of our programs are free of charge. So please support the work of the school by making a donation. The EUST has also been very active in publishing, and what had started as a seed, a simple project of publishing selected writings by the early theosophists from Blavatsky's Lucifer magazine, took on a life of its own and grew into the first 23 volumes of the Lucifer collection, the Blavatsky years 1887 to 1891, which were released last year. They are available on Amazon and will be followed by the post-Blavatsky years, which will conclude this fascinating collection, numbering around 50 volumes. It was indeed a fascinating and inspirational journey to bring back to light the writings of those early authors, making them accessible for readers today. Dr. Franz Hartmann was one of those early theosophists, and another seed was being planted across the ocean by Dos McDavid. He wanted to have several of Hartmann's books in German translated into English and published to make them available to everyone. On approaching the EUST, he found very fertile ground and enthusiasm, to the point that his initial idea to publish 5 books grew to 10 volumes, becoming the Hartmann collection. As with the Lucifer collection, it did not end there. The seeds Dos planted were nurtured and grew further to produce the Hartmann lectures, which will focus on individual volumes presented by some of the people who have dedicated their energy, passion, and time to bringing these volumes into the spotlight. The first series of lectures, being held in June and July, continues today with the talk given by Robert Hutwell, entitled Extracts from the 19-part series of articles from Dr. Franz Hartmann's memorable recollections from the life of the author of the Lotus Blüten. Next Sunday, July 23rd, Suzanne Hopfel-Wellenhofer will present Paracelsus, which is volume 3 in the Franz Hartmann collection. Your microphones will now be muted during the lecture and will not be able to be unmuted until question time at the end. To ask a question, you can either write it in the chat or use the raise hand icon. Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce today's speaker. Robert Hutwell lives and researches in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He holds a degree in professional photography and a BA in pre-medical biology, concentration in the life sciences. For many years, he was an Apple computer software and product consultant. Having finished translating most of Dr. Franz Hartmann's articles from German, including retypesetting Dr. Hartmann's English writings, Robert is preparing material from a wide range of other authors' hard-to-get articles, all newly typeset, which will be available free on his Spirit of the Sun Publications website, which is currently down for rebuild. Robert is working on various projects, such as understanding the last two Atlantis cataclysms, gathering together material to support the facts as to how Sir Francis Bacon and others wrote the Shakespeare works, laying out arguments that humans did not evolve from the animal kingdom, which explains why the missing link has never been determined, and to place into perspective the alien origin theory. He is working on many other projects, such as in the areas of the Kalakra Tantra, and where the damage has been permanently imposed to the human etheric body's permanent atom due to the mRNA gene therapy injection based on the prediction which Rudolf Steiner gave in 1917. So, welcome once again to everyone, and let me now pass the word to Robert and extracts from the 19-part series of articles from Dr. Franz Hartmann's memorable recollections from the life of the author of the Lotus Blüten.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Julie. This is I had difficulty determining what I wanted to present, partly because I have so much material that's laying and waiting for completion. But anyway, because most people are not familiar with Dr. Hartmann's first journal, the Lotus Blüten, I decided to do that. But it took me weeks, even after the translation. It took me quite a while to pare it down, to cull it down to 1 hour, which Erica had requested I make. So if I go a little over an hour, my apologies. So to begin, I have been invited to introduce the Theosophist Dr. Franz Hartmann, who was, I think, a man of all seasons, for all races and all climes. If we look back then, during his lifetime, we find that he was a most curious and open-minded human being. He felt the need to travel and explore other human beings and to travel to other lands. A spark of his interest in the North and Mesoamerican Indians can give us some indication as to his humble respect for these peoples. This led him to occult matters, of which the masters of wisdom had taken notice of him actually at a very early age. If we say about H.P. Blavatsky, when she said, quote, "I make a sort of vacuum in the air before me and fix my sight and my will upon it," unquote. This too gives us some indication of the high level of her interest in the occult nature of the human organism. Now, in this talk, I have deleted many of Hartmann's and my own footnotes. So I've actually taken 3 to 4 hours worth of material of the 18 parts and scaled it down to fit the first part within an hour. So, but I think it'd be worthwhile. So I began in the journal, and if those who are not acquainted with his journal, It was his first journal. He was instructed by the masters to return back to Germany from India and to launch in many areas of interest that he thought would be useful to the German people. So it was a subscription-based journal, I think, but the broadness of his own interest was ported over to his own journal. And so there's so many areas that it's kind of daunting to try to scale it down to the point where he was really of usefulness to the English speaking public. So anyway, I've gone through just about all of his material in all of his journals. Subsequent to the Lotus Blüten, he took a respite, a period of a break, and then he started the journal up again, but it was called Neue Lotusblüten, or New Lotus Flowers. So Hartmann begins, and this is focused on America. Dr. Hartmann writes, in order to satisfy a wish that has been expressed in many ways, we will now include a few pages from the life history of the author of the Lotus Blüten, which should be all the more noteworthy as it is less about his personality and more about things that have to do with the Theosophical movement, and especially with the Theosophical Society, which have not been sufficiently clarified. And I just want to say here that from a historical standpoint, his journals in the future will probably be highly useful because of the things that he's revealed are not given out in any other writings by Theosophical writers and historians. Back to Hartmann. Because Dr. F. Hartmann joined the Theosophical Society in America in 1882, he was drawn into the Theosophical movement and was a friend and student of the widely misunderstood H.P. Blavatsky for several years. A part of his life story should be suitable to dispel certain prejudices and to shed light on much that is still in darkness. So now we begin where he's talking about America, but also about the early parts of his own life. And so that's actually, America doesn't come in until later. It is a serious matter in writing the life history of a mystic, because for the occultist, only the inner life has any real value, while the outer life is for him a passing tragic comedy. The description of which can be best served only as a pastime, but only to a small extent, as an instruction. If the inner threads upon which the deepest feelings and thoughts, which from the motives of external actions are revealed, it takes a certain degree of self-sacrifice to reveal oneself. Dr. Hartmann is, in essence, cosmopolitan. He regards as his home the universe and all humanity as his nation. In this life, the incarnation took place in Donauwörth, which is Bavaria, in Bavaria. Hartmann was born on November 22nd, 1838, and as far as can be approximately determined, at 2 o'clock in the morning. His parents were of royal Bavarian. His father was a court physician, Karl Hartmann, and his wife was Elise von Stock, from the family Stock, S-T-A-C-K, which derives its origin from, and I'm going to stumble here a little bit, from Caolbha, which was the 123rd and last ruler of Ireland and the 47th King of Ulster, who was driven from there to France as a follower of the unfortunate King Charles I. And then his mother immigrated to Bavaria during the French Revolution, where she acquired the Reichelsberg estate near Kempten, Germany. And I have a footnote here. This is ancient Irish that's being written here, but it's Caolbha, and who was the 44th son of Crún Badroy, brother of Frochar, and uncle of Fergus Vogha. Caolbha, his son, the 123rd and last monarch of the Irish race, and the 47th King of Ulster. And I'm going to insert just a small, curious little point. As an aside point, I want to point out that the ancient Ireland area was where the fifth subrace of the Atlantean root race had its beginnings. So if you're familiar with the occult maps, there's a number 5 on one of the maps. And I probably can't hold it up because the map is too large. I have the really large maps. Anyway, around 1 million years ago, of which the secret doctrine says that, the fifth root race, Manu, who went by the name Vivaswata, took the seeds of that subrace, the fifth subrace of the Atlantean, and over many generations, these results were responsible for the formation of the Aryan or fifth root race. Hartmann spent his youth, this is getting back to Hartmann's writing. Hartmann spent his youth in Kempten and received his education there, Kempten, Germany. His maternal grandfather was a veteran of the Russian campaign, the Bavarian Major D. I don't have the complete name, so I don't know what it was. And his mother taught him the French language. He also received his schooling at the local Latin school. But the great outdoors was dearer to him than all Latin. He had built a nest in the thickest darkness of the forest on the Reichelsberg on a tall fir tree and spent many hours there in the company of the forest spirits, reading mystical writings. Early on, a mystic nature stirred in him, and his tendency towards mystery was increased in particular by books which fell into his hands, such as Elizabeth Crow's The Night Side of Nature. That book that Crow wrote was, I believe, it was in 2 volumes. The full title was The Night Side of Nature, or Ghosts and Ghost Seers. It's notable that Hartmann he had mentioned books throughout his Lotus Blüten, his articles, and he got them wrong. So what I've done through the entire 18 parts is correct them and give the full publication so that people can look them up. Getting back to Hartmann, Hartmann's inclination when it came to choosing a profession fluctuated between the soldier's life and that of a hermit. But in the end, his preference for alchemy gained the upper hand. However, since no alchemists were to be found, he thought for the time being to be content with chemistry and decided to become a pharmacist. But he soon found that pharmacy is the least suitable place to acquire a higher knowledge. An interest in gaining money was absolutely not developed in him, and a merit, which was based mainly on the stupidity of the audience, did not attract him. After a period serving in the war in 1859, in 1860, Hartmann moved to the University of München, and decided with a predilection towards chemistry and medicine. So Hartmann had a degree in pharmacy as well as medicine, a medical doctor. And he was also an oculist or eye doctor. He may have been considered eccentric, and rightly so, for the pleasures of everyday life were not enough for him. He was looking for something higher or more mysterious, which he did not know and could not find. He did not know what it was, so he was well on his way to becoming a dreamer and a zealot. In his earliest youth, Hartmann was fond of the Catholic Church, but what he found in the church was, in the end, nothing but vain moldings, the practice of prescribed customs, the alleged worship of a god of which no one knew what or where he was, and a so-called religious business through which a number of black-clad people made their living. But what he saw of Protestantism was even more repulsive than any form of Catholicism, for he felt, without being able to explain it, the absence of the Holy Spirit. Intuition was suppressed and replaced by dogmatism. Fortunately, the man who was not yet fully degenerated still has within him a spark of that divine power which he called reason, and which speaks to him through the conscience. This conscience is rather the light of knowledge which the immortal part of man has acquired during previous lives. May the reader not think that he wished to deny the doctrine of the unity of force and matter. It was taught from time immemorial, only with the difference that the ancient sages also added consciousness to that belief in matter, recognizing the eternal and imperishable as a trinity of substance, energy, and consciousness. Likewise, we do not want to deny the justification of the Darwinian theory, but it does not refer, as the short-sighted alleged disciples of Darwin believe, to the actual man who descends from the gods, but only to the animal man, who is the house in which the heavenly God-man dwells. Nor do we claim that the personal animal man is is immortal. After completing his university studies, Hartmann went to Paris in 1865. Desiring to see the sea, he took a pleasure trip to Havre on the pleasure train one Saturday evening with the intention of being back in Paris by Monday morning. But fate had decreed otherwise, for through one of those coincidences, which in ordinary life is described as an accident, he was offered a position as ship's doctor on the American parcel ship boat carrier called Mercury, which carried immigrants from Paris to New York. And spontaneously he accepted out of the lust for adventures and reached New York after a 42-day journey, not realizing that his visit to America would be extended for 18 years. Arriving in New York, he also wanted to get to know the interior of the country. He went up the Hudson River and came to St. Louis in the state of Missouri, where cholera was raging at and as a result of which he settled there as a doctor and soon got a profitable medical practice. He had not yet met the Indians, so he went unaccompanied into their territory. He rode all over Missouri and visited the nations of the Choctaw, Seneca, Shawnee, and Cherokee Indians, and found among them the friendliest reception. Many remarkable things could be reported about his visit among them. For these people, where they are not yet corrupted by civilization and brandy, live more and live more naturally than that of the Europeans. They are the children of nature, closer to her than we are, and therefore better acquainted with her occult mysteries. In 1871, Dr. Hartmann was in New Orleans, Louisiana, and while he was walking along the harbor, he saw a schooner bound for Mexico. Then he was overcome by the desire to get to know this mysterious country better. He took a place on the ship and traveled to Veracruz, from there to Puebla, Mexico. And after a lengthy stay in the capital and in the charmingly situated Cordova, returned again. In Puebla, he also met a mysterious person in whom he later recognized as an occultist, but he was very much plagued by mosquitoes and therefore visited a pharmacy to buy a remedy for their bites. There, the pharmacist entered into a conversation with him and offered him a room in his pharmacy so that he could prescribe prescriptions there free of charge, in return for which he was promised a share of the profit for the prescribed medicines. That Dr. Hartmann accepted this offer is easy to understand. His reputation soon spread, and in the first month, he had an income that, under other circumstances, could only have been acquired after many years. The questions kept coming up. What is life? What is love? What is truth? What is virtue? Where does good and bad come from? How does justice come about? By what is reason, mind, and consciousness made or generated? How can the brain craft a thought when there is no idea about it, etc.? Nor was he satisfied with the gossip of modern philosophers. You could tell by their words that they were babbling about things they themselves knew nothing about, and moreover, one contradicted the other. Disgusted with the blind speculation of modern philosophers, he threw their books where they belong and stuck to Goethe's Faust, Shakespeare, and poetry. And then one day, Dr. Hartmann read in the newspaper that a certain Professor Peebles was going to give a lecture on spiritualism, to which everyone had access. Yes, he thought to himself, to see such a herd of foolish spiritualists together, the haggard figures with long hair and pale faces sitting there believing the stupidest stuff and being tricked into in the silliest way, that must be an interesting spectacle. To make a joke for himself, he attended the meeting, but found himself surprisingly deceived. For instead of a gathering of hollow-eyed fools and maniacs, he found there the best company in New Orleans, well-dressed, well-fed, and merry-hearted gentlemen and ladies, not a few of whom were noted for their intelligence and sound judgment. What was said there also sounded very reasonable. In reality, according to the speaker, there was no death, only a leaving of the gross material body, with the soul attaining a much better ethereal body, but equipped with all senses and faculties. Dr. Hartmann was friends at the time with a highly educated lady named Katie Wentworth. But she was very incredulous about spiritual things. In other words, she didn't believe what she was experiencing. He attended these sessions with her and saw the materializations, phenomena of light, etc., which are now well known in spiritualist literature. The spirits also spoke in a distinct voice and claimed that Katie Wentworth herself was an excellent medium. How could one ask for further proof that communication between the living and the predecessors was possible? From now on, Dr. Hartmann devoted all his free time to the study of spiritistic phenomena and the philosophy based on them. Katie Wentworth's mediumship was increasing daily, and it would be difficult to find anyone in America or Europe who has seen more of spiritistic phenomena than Dr. Hartmann experienced over the next 10 years. In addition to this, he himself became clairvoyant and clairaudient to a certain extent. A friendship developed, albeit quite platonic, between him and the spirit of Jenny Melvina F. Period. He was often seen accompanied by her, could see and hear her, and they wrote poetry to one another. So we're entering the second part of the 18 parts, and in summary, he dealt with earthbound astral bodies, images in the astral light, telepathy, reflection of unconscious emotional impressions, and elementals parading under false names. The apparitions brought forth through the mediumship of Katie Wentworth continue to increase. Dr. Hartmann says the following about it. In the beginning of our investigations, I constructed a kind of planchette, a turntable with a fixed pointer in the center, and on the periphery was the alphabet. Even when not touched, but lighter when touched, the disc spun, and so we received all sorts of communications in prose as well as in poetry. But soon the turntable was no longer necessary, as Katie's hand wrote notes on paper while she talked about other things. So she was doing two things at one time. Also, we received direct ghost writings without using hands. After a while, Katie went into a trance. She could go out of her body at will, and she would then be possessed by another spirit. Then not only the tone of her voice and her behavior changed, but her entire appearance. Transfigurations or changes took place, in which one could only have recognized her by the clothes she wore. The most accomplished actress could not have achieved this feat. Then came the spirits of Indians and Europeans, known and unknown personalities. O Anamo, Wau Ponce, an alleged Sir John Franklin, the music composer, Strauss. High and low, unfortunate suicides and fawning pastors made their appearance. Each spoke in their own way, but we did not learn anything really valuable, which one could not have imagined for oneself. There was no shortage of physical manifestations either. Katie was bound with ropes by the spirits, or if she was bound by others, she was instantly unbound Indeed, she was even lifted into the air by invisible hands, so that she often floated to the ceiling of the room. All sorts of appearances of figures and materializations took place, and drawings and paintings were also provided by the spirits, but they had no particular artistic value. Unquote from that paragraph. Hartmann continues, as for the alleged spirit messages, a lot of worthless stuff came to light, and on the other hand, there are also many sensible things, such as, for example, the following, quote, look no longer for external evidence. Within yourself, beneath your hard skull, there is a power by which you can converse face to face with the angels. Your job is not turning the table to get answers to trivial questions, but exploring the mysteries of nature for yourself, unquote. So I just want to add here that this is clearly out of the norm, and this was probably the intervention of one of the masters, either M or KH, because of the quality of what is being said compared to everything else. Getting back to the journal, but such answers can be drawn from one's own reason through one's own reflection, and it is not necessary to assume the presence of a ghost or an embodied spirit to explain them. Spiritualism and spiritism are two entirely different things. So he defines here, spiritualism in the true sense of the word is the science of the spirit and its manifestations in nature. Spiritualism is the interaction with spirits, for example, with the denizens of the astral plane, but they are not really spirits because they actually have no spirit. True spiritualism is based on self-knowledge of truth. And then he defines spiritism as practiced today is based on false appearances, ignorance, and deceit by half-animal beings or elementals who are called spirits, but only because they are invisible and whose main propensity is to play foolish farces and to lead people by the nose who are intoxicated by trusting the hype or scam. As long as official science does not know about these elementals, some of which are devilish in nature, it will not succeed in discovering the causes of certain spiritistic phenomena. But the fact that science knows nothing about it is fortunate for mankind. For if persons who have not yet attained that degree of moral spiritual perfection, which would protect them from misusing the secret powers of in nature, were to gain power over these devilish beings, no one would be safe anymore from being chosen as a test subject for the satisfaction of scientific curiosity by inquisitive disciples of black magic. Science without love leads to cruelty and crime. But spiritism is a dangerous thing unless it is understood. Anyone who gives himself over to foreign influences of which he is ignorant and is possessed by them not only easily loses his moral footing and vitality, which the elemental beings draw from him and use to produce phenomena, but he himself becomes without will, and in the end loses his spiritual individuality. Just as it is foolish to cling to the phenomenal or to try to explain spiritual things in a material way, so it is foolish to deny the existence of spirit and to reject one's intuition. For a long time, Dr. Hartmann wandered in the fool's paradise of phenomenal spiritualism, but only until he had got to know these phenomena in all directions. He read a great deal, wrote essays on spiritism, and got involved in newspaper polemics, which did him more harm than good, because the public had no experience of and did not understand the things about which he wrote. Meanwhile, Katie Wentworth's reputation as a medium was spreading among friends and acquaintances. She was invited here today and there tomorrow to hold meetings. In doing so, she was vampirized by the spirits and drained of her life force. The most famous medical authorities from the spirit world came and prescribed for her the most absurd prescriptions, which only robbed her of her powers even more. And finally, a general weakness of nerves and paralysis set in, and she died in Galveston, Texas in 1877 after a year confined to a sickbed, ruined by mediumship. While it is admitted that the departed souls of suicides those executed and those killed before their time are able to connect with the living because they had not yet entirely left the earth realm, what are called earthbound entities. They're still earthbound, and most are to explain for such phenomena by telepathy, by a reflection of the ideas existing in our minds, and by the action of elementals and demons and the like. But the pure soul of the heavenly dweller does not descend to concern himself with the petty affairs of his loved ones. What contacts us is their animal nature left behind. In other words, the kama rupa or the astral corpse, the dirt left behind. So at this point, Dr. Hartmann goes into extensively the former subjects that I mentioned about earthbound astral bodies, images in the astral light, telepathy, obsession, haunted houses, mental perceptions which reach the outer consciousness, and images in the astral light. So he covered a very extensive area of knowledge. Back to Hartmann again. Concerning Dr. Hartmann's experiences in the field of spiritism, he had a large number of interesting experiences to share, but these few examples will suffice to point out that spiritistic phenomena are not all produced by deceased persons, and that the spirit and mind of the living possess abilities and powers which not everyone knows about. The superficially judgmental spiritualist often thinks he has the most undeniable evidence of his interaction with a deceased entity, when in a session he learns something known to no one else but himself. He forgets that he brings with him that which is familiar in his mind, in his mental body, in other words. Even it has just vanished from his memory and is fallen into the subconscious. And that the idea existing in him unconsciously can be reflected in the mind of the medium and find expression there. But if you can control your will, and you can also do such tricks as will. And that is why, for example, H.P. Blavatsky, when she was among the spiritualists, could evoke these appearances of the dead which she wished. In other words, she could arbitrarily transfer the image of a deceased person existing in her imagination onto the plastic matter of the medium's astral body, thereby giving it the form of the deceased, or just as well that of a living person. So a good book to refer to regarding this phenomena was when she met Colonel Olcott, and Olcott wrote the book People from the Other World. But as far as the elementals are concerned, the spiritistic phenomena will remain inexplicable to scholars until they recognize the existence of these invisible creatures, since they are the originators and helpers during most of the physical manifestations. In 1873, Dr. Hartmann was lured to visit Texas by his desire to travel, and he settled there. Life in the big city had become too noisy and exciting for him. He longed for forest air and solitude, and acquired an estate near Brenham, Texas, with woods and meadows, built himself a house, and devoted his time to rural practice and the study of spiritualistic writings. But a house also needs a housewife, and so he decided to marry a lady, the sister of the wife of a neighboring landowner. The marriage was happy but short-lived, because after just 7 months, Ernestine died as a result of a nervous fever. This circumstance relieved Dr. Hartmann of the place, and he went further west into Texas, settling into Fredericksburg, Texas. For 5 years, Dr. Hartmann, while in Texas, studied the country and the people. He spent many nights in the cowboy camps and found among them, in spite of their uncivilized doings, more naturalness, sincerity, and love of truth than among certain circles of European aristocracy, with whom he later had the honor of coming into contact. In 1878, Dr. Hartmann went to Hot Springs, Arkansas, a city with 32 hot springs, which was a famous bathing spot. But on March 5th, 1878, the whole city and also the house in which he was living burned down, which caused him to move further west again to the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, where he found a quiet refuge at Georgetown, 8,500 feet above sea level. There he encountered so-called clairvoyants, who were mediums who claimed to be constantly accompanied by the highest heavenly spirits, angels and archangels, and received advice from them regarding everyday life. Were physically and morally degenerated. Some succumbed to drunkenness, others to madness, some to suicide. The ghosts of loving mothers who had died came to be phantoms to frighten their children to death. The Apostle John came and asked for prayers and rosaries to be said, and then reappeared in tails, a tuxedo, in other words, with a white cravat and a top hat to give thanks for the prayers said. The ghosts of Goethe's Faust, Cervantes' Don Quixote, and Shakespeare's King Lear appeared in full regalia and behaved as if they were indeed deceased persons and not mere poetic creations. Faust even provided the material for his own commentary. And despite all this, the existence of mysterious forces could not be denied. Direct ghost writings appeared without any human intervention on slates and paper in places where no fraud was possible. Seaweeds and shells, still damp from the salty sea, tropical plants, the damp earth hanging by the roots, and with the dewdrops still fresh in the calyxes, were brought through the sea and tropics were a thousand miles away, and yet they appeared as if they had directly come. And all this was done by an old woman who had neither the intelligence nor the means to deceive. In short, Dr. Hartmann found himself in a world of contradictions in which he wanted to clarify at all costs. But all attempts in this direction were in vain. The key to solving the riddle was missing. But no help could be expected from the spirits. Instead of simple answers to simple questions, there was a long-winded and meaningless chatter, unctuous nonsense. There was nothing valuable to learn other than what one already knew for themselves, and what one learned had not the slightest value from them. His one desire was to know what the world really is at its basis. What is the purpose of existence? Whether there is an existence after death, and what it is like. There was no answer to these questions, and more than once it occurred to him to put a bullet through his head and thus gain access to the afterlife and possibly know with certainty. Suddenly, a star of hope appeared in the sky, and an unexpected light pierced the dark night. H.P. Blavatsky's book, Isis Unveiled, brought enlightenment to the mystery of man and his place in nature. There, it was clearly stated that the real spirit of man is a being of divine nature, having his home in heaven, and when he has entered his higher existence, he no longer bothers with earthly dreams, least of all with the trifles of spiritism. Then the mask of the dear ones who had departed before was torn from the face of things, and the spiritless elemental beings were shown in their often hideous forms. In this book, there was no narrow-minded and spiritless erudition, no windy sentimentality and hollow enthusiasm, other than the product of true assurance and knowledge, which precisely because it was true was self-evident. No speculation based on uncertain opinions. Dr. Hartmann joined this society in 1882, as mentioned in another part of this series, and therefore came into contact with its members. The more he heard about the mysterious adepts, the more he wished to get in touch with them himself, even though he did not dare to announce this wish. One morning in 1883, Dr. Hartmann, while half asleep, saw a letter whose handwriting was unknown to him. The foreign postage stamps, which were also unknown to him, were also stuck on it, not on the address side of the letter as is customary, but on the sealed side. After breakfast, he went to the post office and actually found the letter just described. It was a letter from Colonel Wolcott, who invited Dr. Hartmann to come to India and take part in the direction of the Theosophical movement. And I'm going to quote here from one of Dr. Hartmann's letters. It was dated December 25th, 1883 by Master M. The adept says, I placed in H.S. Olcott's head the idea to suggest to you to come here, unquote. A feeling of inner conviction more reliable than any external motive told him that this was the right thing to do and that he could not devote his future activity to a more better purpose. He therefore got ready to leave and left Georgetown, Colorado on September 21st, 1883. There is a section here about his travel reports on his journey through Japan and China onward to India, but I am going to skip over this. Next, Hartmann begins his mentions about India. In India, however, something else contributed to the rapid growth of the Theosophical Society. There was a nation subjected by foreigners for centuries, divided by the spirit of caste. Trampled and despised by the Europeans, they writhed in cowardly fear of the tyrants, knowing that they had no power to help themselves. The Christian missionaries contributed most to the corruption of morals. For though many of the Indian people, had also lost the key to the understanding of their own religion, they still had enough knowledge left to see in the allegories and perverted interpretations dished out to them by the missionaries a caricature of their own teachings. The anger of the Protestant missionaries, finding their reputation and income threatened by this excitement, is understandable, and being powerless with the weapons of the Spirit, they resorted to personal attacks on the character of H.P. Blavatsky. This was how things stood at the headquarters when Dr. Hartmann arrived in India. We are now returning to that point in time. The ship dropped anchor, and soon a deputation of natives, members of the TS, appeared on board to give the newcomer a festive welcome and to bring him a letter from H.P. Blavatsky welcoming him to his homeland. A few remarks made by the Brahmins accompanied him along the way seemed to indicate that all was not well at headquarters, and that, in fact, neither the president nor H.P. Blavatsky, but a certain Madam C. ... mistress in the house, was of concern. Madam C. had known H.P. Blavatsky in Egypt, and after she had become impoverished there, she had come to Adyar with her husband, and where both were hospitably received by H.P. Blavatsky. She knew how to play the cards and had various arts in an Egyptian harem. She learned how to make magic mirrors. She was good at divination, and so had won the president's favor, that during his absence, no one but she, that is Kulam, was allowed to enter Colonel Olcott's room, because, as he claimed, no one could spread good magnetism as she did. The author says the following about his acquaintance with H.P. Blavatsky. Immediately after my arrival in Adyar, I was greeted by H.P. Blavatsky, who had my sympathy from the first moment and with whom I was on friendly terms to the end of her life, although we had a few occasions to get angry at each other. I am now faced with the difficult task of attempting to give a picture of H.P. Blavatsky, an attempt that many have made and that up to now none have succeeded. No one has fully understood them, and no one can understand and describe such people as a whole, because in them there are two natures. He's talking about HPB.